Good evening. We begin tonight with breaking developments out of Geneva, where the second round of indirect nuclear talks between the United States and Iran has wrapped up. Vice President JD Vance, speaking to Fox News, confirmed that while some progress was made, Tehran is still refusing to accept President Donald Trump's core demands. Vance was direct and unambiguous. He said the United States has certain non-negotiable red lines, and the most important one is this: Iran must never obtain a nuclear weapon. The vice president made clear that President Trump is pursuing a solution through diplomacy first, but he is not ruling out other options. And when Vance says other options, the message to Tehran could not be clearer. The president has a very powerful military, Vance said, and he has shown the willingness to use it. He added that Trump also has a remarkable diplomatic team and has shown equal willingness to deploy that as well. The vice president confirmed he personally spoke with Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner just this morning about the ongoing negotiations, signaling that top-level coordination is happening in real time. So where do the talks stand? A U.S. official confirmed that Iran has agreed to return within 2 weeks with detailed proposals aimed at closing the remaining gaps. Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi, for his part, described the Geneva sessions as constructive and said that understandings were reached on guiding principles. That sounds positive on the surface, but American officials are not ready to celebrate just yet. The gap between guiding principles and actually agreeing to hard American demands remains wide. Now, to a story that is impossible to ignore, the United States is sending an unmistakable military message to Iran, and it is being sent in the form of steel, jet fuel, and firepower. Open-source flight trackers and U.S. officials have confirmed that more than 50 American fighter jets have moved toward the Middle East in the past 24 hours alone. These are not just any aircraft. We are talking about F-22 Raptors, F-35 Lightning jets, and F-16 Fighting Falcons, some of the most advanced combat aircraft in the world, all moving together toward the region, accompanied by aerial refueling aircraft that extend their operational range significantly. On the naval front, the USS Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier is already in the region. That ship carries approximately 90 aircraft and roughly 5,000 crew members, and it is not alone for long. The USS Gerald R. Ford, another full-size nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, is currently en route to the region, accompanied by a fleet of destroyers. Military analysts are calling this the largest American military buildup in the Middle East since the Gulf War. That is not a phrase used lightly. This level of force projection is a deliberate signal. President Trump himself tweeted back in early February that, and we quote briefly, "A massive armada is heading to Iran. The intent is clear: use the credible threat of military force to push Iran toward a diplomatic deal." However, most analysts believe the objective at this stage is leverage, not war. The thinking in Washington appears to be this: exhaust every diplomatic channel, keep those channels nominally open, build an overwhelming military presence, and if military action does eventually become necessary, the United States will be able to demonstrate to the world that diplomacy was fully and genuinely tried first. Tehran is not sitting still either. In what many observers are calling a direct act of defiance, the Iranian Navy temporarily shut down parts of the Strait of Hormuz while conducting live-fire military exercises. These drills included missile launches and were clearly timed to coincide with the Geneva negotiations, a signal of their own. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most critical choke points in the entire global energy system. Roughly 20% of the world's oil supply passes through this narrow waterway. Closing it, even temporarily, sends energy markets and international shipping into a state of anxiety. It was closed for several hours as Iranian forces carried out their drills, and the message from Tehran was unmistakable: we have leverage too. From Jerusalem, Israeli officials are looking at this entire situation with deep skepticism. Israeli analysts and officials are predicting that the negotiations are, in their view, likely doomed. They describe Iran's optimism about the talks as a possible smokescreen. Jerusalem's assessment is more pointed than that. Israeli officials believe that President Trump and his close advisors may already be preparing the ground for a military strike against Iran's nuclear facilities, and that the diplomatic process is being used to demonstrate that every peaceful option was genuinely exhausted first. In other words, the talks may not be designed to succeed, and they may be designed to justify what comes next. Israeli political and defense officials are also watching the military buildup very closely. The combination of 2 carrier strike groups, dozens of advanced fighter jets, and the refusal of Iran to accept core American demands creates a scenario that Israel knows well. The window for military action gets wider as diplomacy runs its course. We spoke earlier with Oral Tobellum, Director of Research at the Forum for Foreign Relations, and his analysis is worth hearing carefully. Tobellum pointed out that establishing exactly what Trump's red lines are remains the first challenge. By mid-January, those lines appeared to include not just uranium enrichment and the expansion of Iranian proxy forces across the region, but also the regime's systematic brutalization of its own citizens, particularly the mass executions and killings of protesters happening behind closed doors. However, Tobellum noted something important. Washington's subsequent engagement in what he called choreographed performative talks with Iranian officials in Oman suggests that the red lines may be more flexible in practice than they sound in public statements. He pointed to significant pressure from Gulf states, particularly Qatar, which stand to bear serious consequences from any military escalation given Iran's substantial stockpile of short-range ballistic missiles. Saudi Arabia is also a factor. Saudi Defense Minister Prince Khalid bin Salman visited Washington in late January and then met with the Qatari emir shortly after. That combination of visits, Tobellum argues, has translated into diplomatic restraint in Washington, at least for now. His overall assessment: Iran is unlikely to offer anything beyond familiar assurances and elastic commitments that have historically been walked back once international scrutiny fades. Military action is not likely in the coming days, he said, but the coming weeks and months are a different story entirely. It will come down to 2 variables: whether Iran maintains its defiance on the nuclear file and whether it continues to use lethal force against its own citizens. Now, to deeply troubling scenes from inside Iran, where the regime continues its violent crackdown on its own population. Families across Iran defied heavy pressure from security forces this week to honor victims of the January protests at their 40-day memorial, a deeply significant moment in Iranian culture and tradition. The 40th day after a death is a powerful symbol of mourning and remembrance, and for these families, it became an act of political defiance. Mourners gathered at gravesides across the country, holding memorials for those killed during the brutal crackdowns on January 8th and 9th. Despite threats from security forces, cemetery closures, and heavy police patrols, families performed traditional rituals, released doves, and even danced in their grief. Videos circulated widely showing crowds chanting and applauding those who were killed, with internet disruptions reported in several areas, a familiar tactic used by the regime to limit the spread of information. The victims ranged widely in age. Children and teenagers were among the dead, highlighting the devastating toll the crackdown took on Iran's youth. The situation in one small village became particularly significant. In Chinar, a village that had already gone viral for tearing down a statue of the late IRGC commander Qasem Soleimani, regime forces violently raided the 40-day memorial and arrested a reported 400 people, including children, out of a total village population of only 4,000. That is roughly 1 in 10 residents arrested in a single operation. Footage also emerged from Mashhad and multiple other cities showing security forces raiding memorials and arresting mourners. Across Iran, tens of thousands of people have now been arrested since the protests began in December. And with each passing day, the regime is sentencing more to death. In a move that analysts called deeply cynical, the regime itself held its own counter-memorial, appropriating the deaths of the very civilians it massacred and claiming their deaths were the result of what it called Zionist sedition. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps staged counter-ceremonies where chants of death to America and death to Israel rang out alongside religious eulogies. Tobellum addressed this tactic directly. He said it is a familiar attempt to recast domestic dissent as foreign subversion, a playbook the regime has used many times before. He noted that the overwhelming majority of Iranians, both inside the country and across the diaspora, are not buying it. He also pointed to what he described as an Iranian version of a Qatari media strategy, deploying digital influencers and online personalities to repair the regime's international reputation. He said the tactic is only working on those who are already ideologically aligned with the regime and is having no meaningful effect on the broader public. According to accounts from medical staff in the southeastern city of Kerman, as many as 36,000 protesters may have been killed nationwide over just the 2 days of January 8th and 9th alone. If accurate, these numbers are staggering and represent one of the deadliest government crackdowns on civilian protesters in recent memory. On the military front in Gaza, the Israeli Defense Forces are mourning the loss of a soldier killed in a tragic friendly fire incident overnight in southern Gaza. Staff Sergeant Ophir Yafai, 21 years old, a fighter in the Paratrooper Brigade's reconnaissance unit, was fatally struck by gunfire from other Israeli forces during a demolition operation in the Khan Yunis area. The circumstances are under investigation. Yafai is the 5th Israeli service member killed since the ceasefire took effect in October, and the 925th fallen soldier since Hamas's October 7th attack. Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar is heading to Washington this Thursday to represent Israel at the inaugural meeting of the newly established Board of Peace, a body chaired by President Trump aimed at overseeing the implementation of the U.S. peace plan for Gaza and coordinating reconstruction efforts. Leaders from 28 countries will attend. The board enters a deeply contentious environment, with Hamas calling on it to pressure Israel over what it describes as ongoing violations of the ceasefire. Israel firmly rejects those accusations. Since the ceasefire began, the IDF says dozens of armed operatives have been killed for crossing the ceasefire line and attacking Israeli troops, and targeted strikes against Hamas infrastructure have continued. Israel's primary goal at this meeting will be to ensure that the disarmament of Hamas and its removal from any post-war civil administration of Gaza remain central and non-negotiable priorities. However, Israeli officials acknowledge the diplomatic challenge ahead, particularly with Hamas supporters Turkey and Qatar also holding seats at the table. There is cautious optimism, though, that a Trump-chaired board will be significantly fairer to Israel than the United Nations has historically been. The month-long holy month of Ramadan began overnight, and Israeli security forces are sending a dual message, publicly wishing a peaceful and blessed Ramadan to those observing, while simultaneously intensifying operations in Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria to prevent attacks during what is historically a sensitive and volatile period. Palestinians decorated streets with colorful lights, stocked up on food and sweets, and prepared for the month of fasting from dawn to dusk. Near Hebron, a giant illuminated Ramadan crescent was erected to draw visitors and help revive local businesses. The IDF also published a message on social media wishing a peaceful Ramadan. At the same time, nightly operations have been stepped up in key flashpoints with a focus on Nablus in northern Samaria. Arrest operations, raids, and troop reinforcements are underway, aimed at dismantling terror networks before they can exploit the heightened emotions of the holy month. In Jerusalem, authorities are finalizing security arrangements for large crowds at the Temple Mount. Hezbollah has officially rejected the Lebanese government's proposal to disarm the group within 4 months, with Secretary General Sheikh Naim Qassem calling the plan what he described as a mistake that serves the goals of Israeli aggression. Shiite ministers walked out of the Lebanese cabinet meeting in protest. Meanwhile, the IDF carried out an airstrike in the Bekaa Valley near the village of Majd el-Anjar, targeting 2 Islamic Jihad operatives who had been crossing from Lebanon into Syria and were assessed to pose an immediate threat to Israeli forces and civilians. Lebanese authorities reported 4 people were killed in the strike. And finally, on the defense technology front, Israel is moving closer to deploying its next-generation Arrow 4 missile defense interceptor. Israel Aerospace Industries president and CEO Boaz Levy announced at a defense expo in Tel Aviv that the Arrow 4 system is expected to enter operational deployment in the coming months. Developed jointly with the U.S. Missile Defense Agency, Arrow 4 is designed to intercept advanced ballistic missiles within the atmosphere, including maneuverable and potentially hypersonic threats that challenge older defense systems. It will work alongside the existing Arrow 3 system and will eventually replace the Arrow 2, which first entered service back in 1998. The system has already drawn international interest, including from Germany. Israel's multi-tier air defense network, Iron Dome for short-range rockets, David's Sling for medium-range threats, and the Arrow family for ballistic missiles, remains one of the most sophisticated in the world, and Arrow 4 represents its next major evolution. That is our broadcast for this evening. The situation around Iran remains the defining story of this moment. Diplomacy is on the table, but so is an overwhelming military force. We will be watching closely as the next 2 weeks unfold. Stay informed. Good night.